Well, Ros Foyer is General Secretary of the Scottish Trade Unions Congress. Basically, you're Scotland's top trade unionist, and you were at the inquiry this morning. Just first of all, explain why you were giving evidence and what you had to say.
Well, we were there to give evidence to the UK inquiry about the decision-making processes of the Scottish Government and our interactions with the Scottish Government. But I think one of the most important reasons we were there was to tell the story of workers and their experience of the pandemic and how those interactions and decisions affected those workers.
So what are you talking about in general here? Is this sort of representing people who were working in care homes, perhaps, people who were working in the retail industry who were still expected to go out every day, even when the pandemic was at its height?
Well, I think that group that you talk about, those key workers who worked in health and social care, but also across a range of other key services in local government, in home delivery, in postal workers, teachers, a whole range of services, people who worked in food processing. These were all key workers who went out, put themselves and their families at risk. And the key question we need to ask is, they took care of us. Did we protect them and take care of them?
And where does the STUC stand on that? Do you think that was done well by Scottish Government, UK Government, all those decision makers at the time?
Well, I think it's all relative. I think there were marked differences in the way that Scottish Government undertook its decision-making and the way the UK Government did. The Scottish Government were prepared to consult with trade unions and representatives of workers, and there was quite a bit of evidence of where things were done differently because of that consultation and that more constructive approach, rather than the really disgusting oppositional approach of the UK Government, who, basically took an ideological position that they weren't going to listen to trade unions, even if they were raising legitimate and grave safety concerns.
So what's the sort of example of one of those areas where, in your view, the Scottish Government took a more constructive approach that the UK Government did?
Well, if you look at masks in schools, for example, it's a precautionary approach. There is evidence that shows the UK Government specifically opposed taking that measure because it was being pushed by trade unions, and that's a really regrettable piece of evidence that's emerged in the UK
There was,
inquiry.
just to put forward their case, I think I remember from the time the UK Government did sort of make the argument that masks weren't helpful in school, they could act as a barrier to learning, but your concern is that it was unfair on those who were working in schools.
Yeah, well, there was, the approach advocated by WHO and many other experts is if something, it's about taking a precautionary approach. Now, the evidence may not be fully proven that masks were going to make a massive difference, but given the relatively low cost of asking people to take that precaution, then it's worth it if it's going to potentially save lives.
Now, the situation with COVID is one, sure everyone would agree, we don't want to find ourselves in again, but the part of this inquiry is about thinking about the next pandemic and what could be done differently. So if, God forbid, this was to happen again, what would you say in terms of workers, the different approach should be?
Well, there are massive lessons to be learned, and it's really important that we do look at those. And that goes for the UK Government and the Scottish Government. One of the most fundamental lessons is that, if you're going to try and do public services on the cheap, then they're not going to be resilient enough to cope with a crisis. And we saw that really markedly. There wasn't enough planning for a pandemic, which there should have been. But given the cuts that had been taking place for almost a decade, we ended up in a situation where we weren't able to respond effectively. And workers, their families and service users were put at risk needlessly. If we had been investing properly in our public services and following the sort of planning that was meant to be followed, that wouldn't have happened. So that's one of the fundamental lessons. There are many, many other lessons which we listed in our evidence today to the inquiry. And we will have further opportunities. This part today was just about the UK Government and the Scottish Government decision-making processes. There will be further opportunities for us to bring our evidence forward.
Yeah, important to stress this is one of two inquiries and both have a long way to go. Indeed. So no doubt be hearing a lot more about all of this. Ros Foyer from the Scottish Trade Unions Congress, thank you so much for coming in today and joining us on the programme.